Somewhere right now, a man is standing in front of a mirror, straightening his tie, rehearsing a pitch he has rehearsed 100 times before. He knows the numbers, he knows the market, he knows exactly what to say, and in 9 minutes, he is going to walk into that room and freeze. Not because he isn't smart enough or he didn't prepare. He is going to freeze because somewhere inside him, in a place no business book ever taught him to look, he does not believe he is the kind of person who gets the yes. Here is the uncomfortable truth almost nobody tells you: you have never once, in your entire life, outperformed your own self-image. Not in business. Not in money. Not in love. Not in health. You can read every productivity book, download every app, hire every coach, and none of it will matter if the person you believe yourself to be, deep down, in the part of your mind that never sleeps, was never invited to the meeting. In 1960, a plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz noticed something that terrified him. He could give a patient a perfect new face, and the patient would walk past a mirror 3 days later and still flinch. Still see the old scar. Still feel like the same broken person, wearing new skin like a costume that didn't fit. That single observation became one of the most quietly influential ideas of the last century. Actors used it, astronauts used it, athletes used it before sports psychology was even a phrase. And somehow, most people today have still never heard his name. If you have ever set a goal, worked harder than everyone around you, and still watched yourself sabotage it at the finish line, this is the video that explains why. And more importantly, it's the video that shows you how to stop. The book is called Psycho-Cybernetics, and its promise is deceptively simple: you already have a built-in success mechanism inside your nervous system, wired and waiting, capable of steering you toward any goal you can clearly picture. The only reason it isn't working for you right now is that it has been quietly reprogrammed, over years, by a version of yourself that no longer needs to exist. Maxwell Maltz was not a motivational speaker. He was a surgeon, a scientist, a man who spent his career studying scar tissue, and along the way he stumbled onto something far more valuable than a better technique for reconstructing a nose. He discovered the architecture of human change itself. And when he wrote it down, he accidentally created the blueprint that would later shape modern coaching, visualization training, cognitive behavioral therapy, and nearly every serious book on peak performance written since. Here is what's going to happen over the next several minutes. We are not going to walk through this book chapter by chapter like a textbook. That would waste your time, and honestly, it would waste the story. Instead, we are going to walk through it the way Maltz's patients walked through their own transformation, one honest confrontation at a time. You'll meet the invisible prison you didn't know you were living in. You'll understand why trying harder has been making your problem worse, not better. And by the end, you'll have a working method, not a vague inspiration, for rewriting the internal blueprint that has been quietly running your life. Stay with me, because the second lesson is the one that changes everything that comes after it. Lesson 1: The Invisible Prison. Picture two people applying for the exact same promotion. Same resume. Same experience. Same interview answers, almost word for word. One gets the job. One doesn't. We love to explain this away with luck, timing, connections. But Maltz would ask a different question: which one of them actually believed, in their bones, that they belonged in that role before they ever walked through the door? Every person carries around an invisible blueprint of who they are, not who they wish they were, not who they tell people they are, but who they actually, privately, believe themselves to be. Maltz called this the self-image, and he discovered something almost nobody wants to hear: your self-image isn't a reflection of your abilities. It's a prediction engine. And your brain will move heaven and earth to make that prediction come true, even when it's wrong, even when it's cruel, even when it's costing you everything you say you want. This is the part that reframes the entire book. Maltz argued that your self-image sets the boundaries of what's possible for you, the same way the walls of a room set the boundaries of how far you can walk. You can want to walk further. You can visualize walking further. But until the walls move, you won't. Willpower doesn't expand the room. Only a change in self-image does. Maltz treated thousands of patients whose faces were transformed by surgery, yet whose behavior never changed. A young woman with a disfiguring birthmark had it removed entirely, flawlessly, and she still covered her cheek with her hand in every conversation for months afterward. The scar was gone. The blueprint that said, "I am someone people flinch away from," was still fully intact, still running the show, still making decisions on her behalf while she wasn't looking. Before you learn a single new strategy from this video, do this: write down one sentence that finishes the phrase, "I am not the kind of person who." Whatever comes out honestly is the wall of the room you've been living in. You cannot renovate a room you refuse to look at. Notice something important here. This isn't a confidence problem in the way we usually talk about it at work. It's not about posture, or tone of voice, or faking it until you make it, in a meeting. It's structural. It's architecture. And architecture doesn't respond to pep talks, it responds to renovation. But here's the disturbing part. That belief didn't start with you. It was installed. And the way it was installed is even stranger than the belief itself. Lesson 2, the face that changed everything. We tend to assume that confidence comes from competence, that if you just get good enough at something, the fear disappears on its own. Maltz's own career proved this assumption dangerously wrong, over and over, on the operating table. As a surgeon, Maltz became famous for a strange, specific pattern. Roughly 90% of his patients underwent surgery, saw a genuinely improved reflection, and felt transformed. But about 10% looked in a mirror at a face that had objectively, measurably changed, and reported feeling exactly the same as before. Same insecurity. Same shame. Same self-consciousness. The surgery had succeeded and the person had not. This forced Maltz to a conclusion most surgeons of his era never reached: the deformity people were truly suffering from was rarely on their skin. It was in their self-image, and skin-deep surgery cannot reach it. He began to suspect that if a physical scar could distort a person's entire identity for decades, an emotional scar, a humiliation, a rejection, a cruel sentence spoken by a parent at exactly the wrong age, could do precisely the same thing, invisibly, to someone with a flawless face. He describes patients who carried what he called emotional scar tissue from moments most people would consider forgettable. A boy told once, offhand, that he was the clumsy one in the family, who grew into a 50-year-old man still secretly avoiding any activity that required coordination in front of others. The comment lasted 4 seconds. The prison built from it lasted a lifetime. Ask yourself the question Maltz asked his patients: is there a sentence, spoken by someone else, years ago, that you have been unconsciously living inside of ever since? Find it. Name it. You cannot dismantle a wall you've mistaken for the shape of the room itself. This is where most self-help stops, at the diagnosis. But Maltz didn't stop there, because he wasn't just a surgeon of the body. What he discovered next is the actual mechanism, the machinery, behind how change is engineered. Lesson 3, your built-in success mechanism. Most people treat success like a personality trait, something you either have or you don't. Confident people succeed, anxious people don't, end of story. This belief is not just wrong. Maltz would say it's the exact thing keeping you stuck. Here's what almost nobody realizes: your nervous system doesn't actually care whether an experience is real or vividly imagined. It responds to the image, not the event. Which means every time you rehearse failure in your head, the awkward conversation, the rejection, the humiliating mistake, you are not preparing for it. You are practicing it. Literally training your nervous system to produce it. Maltz borrowed a term from engineering, the servomechanism, a self-correcting system that steers automatically toward a target, adjusting in real time, the way a torpedo corrects its own course or a thermostat corrects a room's temperature without a human hand on the dial. He proposed that your brain works the same way. Give it a clear, specific goal, and it will unconsciously steer you toward it, finding opportunities, noticing resources, making micro-decisions you're not even aware of. But feed it a blurry, fearful, self-doubting target, and it will steer just as reliably toward that instead. Your mind isn't lazy. It's obedient. That's the terrifying part. Maltz cites what became one of the most famous demonstrations in performance psychology. Basketball players were split into 3 groups. One practiced free throws physically, every day. One did nothing. One only imagined making the shot, in vivid detail, without touching a ball. The group that only imagined practicing improved almost as much as the group that physically trained. Their nervous systems couldn't fully distinguish rehearsal from reality. Think about what that actually means for the businessperson watching this, not the athlete. The negotiation you've already lost 100 times in your imagination, replaying the moment they say no, replaying the awkward silence. You didn't skip practicing that outcome. You trained for it. Diligently. Nightly. And then you walked into the real room wondering why your body already knew how to freeze. Choose one high-stakes moment coming up in your week, a negotiation, a hard conversation, a pitch. Spend 5 minutes tonight closing your eyes and rehearsing it going exactly right, in first person, in vivid sensory detail. Not the outcome. The process. You are not being unrealistic. You are recalibrating the machine. But the author discovered something even more surprising than the mechanism itself, because a machine only steers toward the target you actually give it. And most people, without realizing it, have been giving theirs the wrong one. Lesson 4, The Habit of Failure. Some people fail once and adjust. Others fail once and seem to keep failing, in different rooms, with different people, for the rest of their lives, as if failure itself had become a room they can't find the exit from. Maltz identified what he called the failure-type personality, and its defining trait isn't laziness or lack of talent. It's a person whose internal servo mechanism has been unconsciously reprogrammed to aim for safety instead of success, because somewhere along the way, failure got mixed up with identity. The moment "I failed" quietly rewrites itself into "I am a failure," the entire targeting system shifts. It stops chasing the goal and starts protecting the wound. This is one of the most important distinctions in the entire book. Failure is feedback, not identity. A missile that drifts off course doesn't decide it's a bad missile and give up, it corrects and continues. Only humans take a single data point and rewrite their entire self-image around it. Maltz insisted that the people who succeed most aren't the ones who fail less. They're the ones who never let a failure cross the border into becoming a verdict about who they are. He recounts patients paralyzed not by their actual mistakes, but by their memory of a mistake, replayed on loop for years, treated with more reverence than any evidence of their competence. One businessman had rebuilt his entire company after one early bankruptcy, and yet 20 years later still introduced himself, quietly, in his own head, as the guy who lost everything once. The company thrived. The self-image never got the memo. Think of your most recent setback. Now, deliberately rewrite the sentence in your head from "I failed, so I am," to "That approach failed, so next I will." This isn't wordplay. It's redirecting the missile before it locks onto the wrong target for another 20 years. However, this is only half the story. Understanding the mechanism and even correcting your aim still leaves one enormous obstacle standing in the way, and it's the one thing almost every hard-driving, ambitious person gets completely backwards. Lesson 5, The Trap of Trying Too Hard. We are taught, almost from childhood, that effort is the answer to everything. Struggling? Push harder. Not enough. Grind more. And yet Maltz observed something that should unsettle every overachiever watching this video: excessive strain, forced effort, and white-knuckled willpower were consistently associated with worse performance, not better. A servo mechanism cannot function correctly under conscious overcontrol. Think about it physically: a golfer who consciously micromanages every muscle in their swing performs worse than one who has drilled the motion until it runs automatically. The same is true of confidence, of charisma, of decision-making under pressure. The more you consciously strain to force the outcome, the more you jam the very system that was designed to deliver it automatically. Maltz's radical suggestion was this: you don't achieve your goals by trying harder in the moment of performance. You achieve them by preparing the target clearly in advance, and then, in the moment itself, getting out of your own way and trusting the mechanism to steer. He called this, letting go, and it terrified the Type A patients he worked with the most, because it felt like giving up when it was actually the opposite. It was finally putting the steering wheel in the hands of a system built to drive. He describes a surgeon, himself, more than once, whose hands performed most precisely not when he was hyper-focused on every individual motion, but when years of training had allowed the procedure to become almost automatic, freeing his conscious mind to handle only the decisions that actually required it. The trying had already happened, in practice, months earlier. The moment of performance simply needed to be trusted. The next time you catch yourself white-knuckling a moment, a hard conversation, a presentation, a decision, take one slow breath and mentally say, I've prepared. Now I execute. Then stop consciously steering and let the rehearsal you already did take over. There is a quiet irony buried in this lesson that's worth sitting with. The most driven people are usually the ones who need to hear it most, and the ones most likely to resist it, because relaxing the grip feels, to an ambitious mind, indistinguishable from giving up. It isn't. A pilot doesn't grip the controls tighter during turbulence because gripping tighter helps. They trust the instruments they trained on and make small, deliberate corrections. Your self-image is the instrument panel. Trust the readings you've already calibrated. The real breakthrough comes from a question Maltz asked that nobody in his era was asking out loud: if all of this can be reprogrammed, what do you actually do with the years of old blueprints still sitting there? Lesson 6. Divorcing yourself from your past mistakes. Most people carry their past like a criminal record, cross-referencing every new opportunity against every old failure, as if the two were permanently linked evidence in the same case file. Maltz observed that emotional scar tissue behaves almost exactly like physical scar tissue. It doesn't heal on its own just because time passes. It has to be consciously, deliberately addressed, or it calcifies and quietly restricts movement for decades, long after the original wound is gone. The mind, left unmanaged, defaults to reviewing old evidence instead of gathering new evidence. He proposed something that still sounds almost too simple to work: mistakes are not verdicts. They are information gathered by the servo mechanism to correct course, exactly the same way a thermostat fails, repeatedly, in tiny corrections, on its way to holding a room at the right temperature. You would never call a thermostat a failure for adjusting. Yet we sentence ourselves for the exact same behavior. He worked with patients who had committed a single, real, undeniable mistake decades earlier, a failed marriage, a business collapse, a public embarrassment, and were still, functionally, living as though it were the current headline of their life, rather than one page in a much longer book that had kept being written without their permission. Identify the one mistake you reference most often, silently, when you doubt yourself. Then consciously reclassify it, out loud if you have to: that was a data point, not a life sentence. Say it until it stops sounding strange. But letting go of the past is only useful if you know exactly what you're steering toward instead, and this is where Maltz introduces the tool almost every high performer since has quietly borrowed from him. Lesson 7. Rehearsing the future you want. Most people set goals the way they make New Year's resolutions: vague, emotional, and completely disconnected from the vivid, specific imagery their nervous system actually needs in order to act. "I want to be more confident" gives your internal mechanism nothing to lock onto. It's the equivalent of typing coordinates into a missile guidance system that just say, "somewhere over there." The servo mechanism needs a target it can actually see, and most people never give it one. This is where Maltz's most practical contribution lives: structured mental rehearsal. Not daydreaming. Not wishful thinking. A disciplined, repeated, first-person visualization of the specific behavior you want to become automatic, sitting in the room, feeling the posture, hearing your own voice deliver the words calmly. Done consistently, it doesn't just build confidence. It builds neurological familiarity, so that when the real moment arrives, part of you has already been there. This is the exact principle later adopted, often without crediting the source, by Olympic training programs, elite surgical residencies, and hostage negotiators, professionals whose one shot at performance can't afford a first-time jitter, so they manufacture the first time safely in the mind, dozens of times before it counts. Pick the version of you that handles pressure the way you wish you did. Tonight, spend 10 quiet minutes being that person, in vivid first-person detail, in a specific upcoming scenario. Do this daily for 2 weeks before judging whether it works. 1 rehearsal moves nothing. Repetition is the mechanism. Here's why most people quit this practice after 2 or 3 days and conclude it doesn't work for them. They're waiting to feel different before they believe it's working. That's backward. The nervous system updates quietly, beneath conscious awareness, long before you notice a shift in how you feel. You will not feel the mechanism recalibrating. You'll simply notice, one ordinary Tuesday, that the room you used to dread didn't feel like a threat anymore. By then the work will already be finished. And this is where the story turns, because everything you've learned so far, the self-image, the mechanism, the failure loop, the letting go, the rehearsal, all of it converges on one final, uncomfortable truth Maltz saved for last. Lesson 8, Becoming the New You. Knowledge alone changes nothing. You can understand every idea in this video perfectly and still walk away tomorrow morning and behave exactly like the person you were yesterday, because insight and identity are not the same thing. Maltz's closing argument is almost unsettling in its honesty: your self-image will not update because you understood a concept. It updates only through repeated, lived experience that contradicts the old blueprint, small, deliberate acts of behaving as the person you intend to become, before you fully feel like that person yet. He called this acting as if, and it is not self-deception. It's closer to how a servo mechanism actually learns, not through analysis, but through feedback from real attempts. You don't think your way into a new self-image. You act your way into one small piece of evidence at a time, until the mind has enough data to update the file. He describes patients who transformed not in a single cinematic moment, but through what he called a 21-day period of consistent new behavior, long enough for an old pattern to lose its grip and a new one to start to feel less like performance and more like identity. Not magic. Repetition, doing the work of rewriting the file. Action. Choose one specific behavior of the person you want to become, not a feeling, a behavior. Do it deliberately for the next 21 days, even on the days it feels fake. Especially on those days. That discomfort is the old blueprint losing its grip, not evidence that the new one isn't real. Conclusion. Here is what you actually walked through in the last few minutes. You confronted the invisible prison your self-image has quietly built around what you believe is possible for you. You traced it back to the moment it was likely installed, often by someone who has long since forgotten they said it. You discovered that you already carry a success mechanism sophisticated enough to steer you toward any clear target you consistently give it, and that it has simply been aimed at the wrong coordinates. You learned why forcing outcomes backfires, why your past mistakes are evidence, not verdicts, and why vivid rehearsal in your mind is not indulgence but training. And finally, you learned the only thing that actually moves any of it from theory into your life: repeated action, taken before you feel ready, for as long as it takes the new evidence to outweigh the old. Maxwell Maltz spent his career discovering that the deepest transformations were never really about the face in the mirror. They were about the story that face had been quietly telling itself for years. You don't need a new face. You don't even need a new circumstance. You need one new piece of evidence, starting today, that the old sentence about who you are is no longer true. So don't close this video and simply feel inspired for 20 minutes before returning to the same defaults. Pick one lesson from everything you just heard. Just one. The rehearsal. The 21 days. The single sentence you're finally willing to rewrite. Do it before you sleep tonight, while it's still alive in you. Because somewhere out there, right now, is a version of you who already made this decision, who already rewired the mechanism, who already stopped flinching at a scar that healed years ago. The only question Maltz's entire life's work was really asking, underneath all of it, is simple: how much longer are you willing to let an old picture of yourself keep steering a life that has already changed? If this video gave you even one idea worth carrying into tomorrow, you know exactly what to do next. Subscribe, so the next transformation finds you. And leave a comment with the one sentence you're finally ready to rewrite. Someone else scrolling through these comments tonight needs to read it as much as you needed to write it.